So, good morning. I hope everybody's doing well. I just want to take some time this morning. We're going to go through the book of Esther. I know last night I think I said Ruth, but I really meant Esther. We're going to take some time and go through the book of Esther for our Bible study for the next few days. And I wanted to spend some time kind of going over the background of Esther because there's a lot that goes into really understanding what happens with Esther. So I'm going to give you a crash course in Jewish history and the background to Esther and what goes on in the first chapter. Bear with me as we go through this. So to get some understanding of Jewish history, you've got the kings, you've got Saul, you've got David, and then you've got Solomon. Well, after Solomon, the kingdom kind of falls apart, and you have two groups kind of break apart. You have Judah and Benjamin that break off and form one section that we're going to call Judah, and then you have the other 10 tribes that stick together. We're just going to call them Israel. So you've got Israel and Judah going through. And if you read through, the Old Testament, you get to some of these books where they talk about, and Judah did this, and then Israel did this, and then Judah did this, and then Israel did this. It kind of goes back and forth. That's what goes on in parts of the Old Testament. And we see through there that Israel really rebels against God, that they really go crazy and just do some really bad things, even to the point where they take some of the really detestable practices that the Old Testament people had, that they started to sacrifice their kids to foreign gods. And that's why God kicked them out in the first place. So we see that God just kind of gets angry with the Israelites and tells them, listen, I told you, as long as you do what I say, you'd be good. But now you're not doing what I say. This isn't good. So he sends in 721 AD, he sends the Assyrians in, and they take over Israel, and they grab several Israelites and bring them back to Assyria. This starts what we call the exile. This is where God says, if you're not going to do what I told you to do, I'm kicking you out of the promised land. But it's going to be for a little bit of time because I know you guys are going to come back to me. So this is a temporary kick out. So we call it an exile. Well, so 721, the Assyrians come in. Then in 615 AD, the Babylonians attack and destroy the Assyrians, and they become the main power in town. Well, and then while this is going on, Judah, they kind of flirt back and forth with following God and following other gods, and God just finally gets sick of it and says, all right, you guys didn't learn the lesson from watching Israel get destroyed, so now I'm going to send the Babylonians to come up against you. And the Babylonians attack 3 different times from 597 through 581 AD. They attack and capture Israelites 3 different times and bring them back to Babylon. This really gets the exile going, because now we have not just Israel but Judah involved in this as well. This is the time when the book of Daniel was written. Daniel was one of the exiles brought from Judah to Babylon. So it takes place during that time. So we have the exile going full force now. Then in 539, the Babylonians are conquered by Persia, and this was done very bloodlessly, like really only one person dies, and you can read about this in the book of Daniel, that the Babylonian king was like, hey, look at me, I'm awesome, and then Daniel comes in and is like, hey, you're gonna die tonight, Persia's taken over. Daniel's a little jaded at this time. You really should check it out. Daniel, I love reading Daniel, one of my favorite stories in all of the Bible. So the Persians take over, and 2 years after the Persians take over, their king Cyrus the Great, he decides that it's time to end the exile, and he allows the Jews to go back to Israel. He releases them. He even helps them. They come and say, hey, we need to rebuild our temple and we need to rebuild the walls. And the king was like, great, take everything you need. Here's letters that you can take to Home Depot and they'll give you everything that you need to get the job done. And I'm going to pay for it and everything. I think this is a testament to how good of a man Daniel was, and that Daniel lived his life honoring God, and Cyrus saw that. This is just my own personal opinion on that one there. So the people come back. This is where the book of Ezra and Nehemiah take place. They take place during this time. So now we've got our setup here. We've got the exile has happened. The book of Esther actually takes place after the exile. It's a group of Jews that decided not to leave the area. They decided to stay in Persia. And these Jews are living in a particular place called Susa. It's in a kind of a small kingdom near the land of Persia. If you haven't been able to figure this out, the land of Mesopotamia goes through a ton of different rulers. I mean, you got the Assyrians, and then the Babylonians, and then the Persians and the Medes, and then you got the Greeks that come in, and then they leave, and then you got the Seleucid Empire, and then you got the Romans. I mean, it's just back and forth and back and forth. It's crazy. But for those of us history buffs, we like studying the history of Mesopotamia because there's lots of wars and stuff. So we're sitting in this kingdom of Susa, and the king there, he decides that he's going to throw a big party for his people, and he throws this for like 180 days. Like, this is a long party, and at this party, he wants to show the people that live in the fortress of Susa just how awesome he is. So everybody's invited, but when we talk about parties during this time, men and women didn't party together. So when he says he throws this party for everybody there, it's just for the men. So the king is there with all of his men folk at this party, and the king is very insistent that everyone drinks as much as they want. Like, if they want something, you give it to them, because he wants to show how powerful and how rich, how wealthy he is. So he just goes to town, man. We're going to have this big old party. Everybody's going to be happy. Well, while they're at the party, the king gets a little inebriated. He gets a little drunk, and he wants to show off his queen. Now, while he's having this party, the queen is having her own banquet for the women in the town of Susa, and they're doing their thing. The men are doing their thing, and so the king, he says, "I want to show off how beautiful my queen is." So he tells his eunuchs, those are the guys that are taking care of the queen and his concubines. He tells his eunuchs, "Hey, go get the queen and bring her here and make sure she's wearing her crown." Now, it's not clear if he means make sure she is only wearing her crown, or bring her here but make sure she's wearing her crown. My guess is, based on the context and based on what I'm seeing here, that the king wants to show off his queen, and so he says, make sure she's only wearing her crown. I want these people to see how beautiful my queen really is. Now, Queen Vashti, she's got a difficult decision to make here. Does she honor her king and go and allow him to treat her like a piece of meat? Or does she stand up and do what's right? And I think this is one of those really strong women that we see in the Bible, that she only gets mentioned for a few verses. But Queen Vashti stands up and says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to allow you to treat me like a piece of meat. I'm not going to allow you to just show me off to these people in this court. I'm more than a pretty face. I'm more than a body. I am a person. And so she refuses to go. The king, of course, gets very mad because he's drunk. And he decides that he needs to do something about this. So the king gets together with his officials, with his wise men that he goes to for advice, and he says, listen, guys, what do I do? What do the laws say that I can do here in this situation? And they get together and they talk about things, and this is what they come up with. And I think it's rather interesting, their motivation here for this. They said, and this is directly from Esther, chapter 1, it says, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also every noble and citizen throughout your empire. Women everywhere will begin to despise their husbands when they learn that Queen Vashti has refused to appear before the king. Before this day is out, the wives of all the king's nobles throughout Persia and Media will hear what the queen did and will start treating their husbands the same way. There will be no end to their contempt and anger. See, the wise men, they're sitting around and they're like, dude, if you don't do something, our wives are going to stop listening to us, and we don't want that. We don't want women who can think for themselves. We want them just to be barefoot and pregnant and cook for us. We don't want them to have an opinion of their own and to start to talk back to us. So you got to do something. So what they decide to do is they decide to depose the queen. She would no longer be the queen, and she would be banished forever from the presence of King Xerxes. That means if King Xerxes ever sees her again, it's death. She will be put to death. This is pretty big. She's been taken from a very prominent position now, and she's been thrown out on her ear. Like, you're toast, chica. And this would send a message to the women of Persia, to the women of Susa, to the women all throughout the kingdom. Don't mess with your men because they'll throw you out. This is a very public and very nasty divorce that she's going to go through here, because she stands up and she did the right thing by refusing to go before the king. So that's basically what the first chapter of Esther is like, is what it's about. I hope that you spend some time today going over this first chapter of Esther and answering the questions that I'm going to send you. I really hope that you spend some time really digging into this, because I think Esther and especially Vashti here in chapter 1, they really give us a good example of what we are to do as Christians. Have a great day.